Welcome to the fascinating world of deep learning in the late 1980s. Picture this. It's 1987, and the sleepy town of Miraflores, Spain is buzzing with excitement. Nearly 1,300 researchers, scientists, and tech enthusiasts have descended upon this picturesque coastal village for what promises to be a groundbreaking event in the field of artificial intelligence. At the center of this whirlwind is George Cybenko, a brilliant mathematician with a background in signal processing. As he makes his way through the crowded halls of the conference center, he can't help but feel a bit overwhelmed. The air is electric with anticipation, and everywhere he turns, he overhears snippets of conversations about neural networks, hidden layers, and the promise of machines that can learn. Cybenko finds himself sharing a dorm room with none other than Sergey Brin, one of the future founders of Google. "Dude, this is amazing!" Brin exclaims, his eyes wide with excitement. "Can you believe how many people are here?" Indeed, the turnout is staggering. Researchers from all corners of the globe have gathered to discuss the latest developments in deep learning, a field that's rapidly gaining momentum. Deep neural networks, with their multiple layers of interconnected nodes, are pushing the boundaries of what's possible in machine learning. As Cybenko makes his way to the main lecture hall, he's stopped by countless attendees eager to shake his hand or ask for an autograph. It's a surreal experience for the humble mathematician who never expected to find himself at the center of such attention. "I feel like a rock star," Cybenko thinks to himself, a mix of excitement and disbelief washing over him. He's about to present his latest work, a theorem that he believes will shed new light on the capabilities of neural networks. Little does he know that his findings will spark a debate that will ripple through the AI community for decades to come. The lecture hall falls silent as Cybenko takes the stage. He clears his throat, adjusts his glasses, and begins to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen," he says, his voice steady despite the butterflies in his stomach, "I'm here to present a theorem that I believe will change the way we think about neural networks." The audience leans forward, pens poised over notepads, eager to capture every word. Cybenko takes a deep breath and continues. "Imagine, if you will, a neural network with just one hidden layer. Now, what if I told you that this simple structure, given enough neurons, could approximate any continuous function?" A murmur ripples through the crowd. Skeptical glances are exchanged, but Cybenko presses on. "Think of it like this. Picture a complex landscape with hills, valleys, and winding rivers. Our neural network is like an artist trying to recreate this landscape using only building blocks of a single shape. Let's say rectangles." He sketches a quick diagram on the overhead projector, showing a jagged line approximating a smooth curve. At first glance, it might seem impossible. How could you possibly capture the nuances of a flowing river or the gentle slope of a hill using only rectangles? But here's the key. If we make these rectangles small enough and use enough of them, we can get arbitrarily close to the original landscape. The room is silent now, all eyes fixed on Cybenko as he continues his explanation. In mathematical terms, what this means is that a neural network with a single hidden layer can, in theory, approximate any continuous function to any desired degree of accuracy. We just need to provide it with enough neurons, our building blocks, in that hidden layer. Hands shoot up across the auditorium. Questions fly thick and fast. But how many neurons would we need? What about discontinuous functions? Does this mean we don't need deep networks? Cybenko fields the questions one by one, his excitement growing as he realizes the implications of his work are sparking intense debate. As the session draws to a close, he can see minds racing, grappling with the possibilities his theorem has opened up. As he steps down from the podium, a colleague approaches him, shaking his head in amazement. "George, do you realize what you've done? You've just challenged everything we thought we knew about the limitations of neural networks. This could change everything." As word of Cybenko's theorem spreads through the conference, it ignites a firestorm of discussion and debate. Researchers huddle in small groups, scribbling equations on napkins and gesticulating wildly as they argue about the implications. The excitement is palpable, with many seeing this as a breakthrough that could revolutionize the field of neural networks. In the days and weeks that follow, Cybenko's theorem becomes the talk of the AI community. Papers are hastily written and submitted to journals, each author eager to be the first to explore the ramifications of this new understanding. Conference calls are hastily arranged, bringing together researchers from across the globe to dissect every aspect of the proof. But as the initial wave of excitement begins to settle, a curious interpretation starts to take hold. More and more researchers begin to focus on a single aspect of Cybenko's work, the idea that a network with just one hidden layer could, in theory, approximate any continuous function. Why bother with deep networks becomes a common refrain in research labs and university departments. Cybenko's theorem shows we can do everything with a single layer. This simplified interpretation spreads like wildfire through the community. Suddenly, researchers who had been exploring complex, multi-layered architectures find themselves swimming against the tide. Funding for deep network research begins to dry up, with grant committees favoring proposals focused on single-layer networks. At conferences and workshops, presentations on deep learning are met with skepticism. But have you considered a simpler architecture? Becomes a dreaded question, often followed by a reference to Cybenko's theorem. The impact is felt in industry as well. Companies developing AI applications begin to favor simpler network designs, touting their efficiency and pointing to the theorem as justification. Why waste computational resources on deep networks, they argue, when a single layer can theoretically do the job? Cybenko himself watches this trend with growing unease. He attempts to clarify his findings, emphasizing that while a single-layer network can theoretically approximate any function, the number of neurons required might be impractically large for complex tasks. But his nuanced explanations often fall on deaf ears, drowned out by the louder voices proclaiming the sufficiency of simple networks. As the 1990s dawn, the AI community finds itself at a crossroads. The promise of neural networks is clear, but the path forward is muddied by misinterpretation and oversimplification. Researchers like Jeffrey Hinton, Yann LeCun, and Yoshua Bengio continue to advocate for deeper architectures, but they find themselves increasingly isolated. Meanwhile, in labs and startups around the world, developers grapple with the limitations of single-layer networks. They find themselves hitting walls, unable to achieve the performance they need for complex tasks like image recognition or natural language processing. But rather than questioning the prevailing wisdom, many simply conclude that neural networks as a whole are not up to the task. The stage is set for a long winter in deep learning research. As funding dries up and interest wanes, those still committed to exploring the potential of multi-layer networks find themselves working in relative obscurity. Little do they know that their persistence will eventually lead to a renaissance in the field. But for now, they toil in the shadow of a theorem whose implications have been misunderstood. In research labs across the globe, scientists grapple with the limitations of single-layer networks. At MIT, a team led by Dr. Sarah Chen is working on a computer vision project aimed at identifying cancerous cells in medical images. They've designed a neural network based on Cybenko's theorem, confident that a single hidden layer should be sufficient for the task. "We've got over 1 million neurons in this layer," Dr. Chen explains to her team during a progress meeting. "According to the theorem, we should be able to approximate any function we need for accurate classification." But as they run test after test, the results are disappointing. The network struggles with complex images, often misclassifying benign cells as cancerous and vice versa. Frustration mounts as the team tweaks parameters and adjusts training data, but the improvements are marginal at best. Across the Atlantic, at a startup in London, developers are facing similar challenges. They're building a natural language processing system for customer service chatbots, again relying on a single-layer architecture. "We've thrown everything we can at this network," sighs lead developer James Wong, running his hands through his hair. "We've increased the neuron count, fine-tuned our training data, even experimented with different activation functions, but it's still struggling with context and nuance in customer queries." The chatbot, while capable of handling simple requests, frequently misinterprets more complex customer issues. It's a far cry from the human-like interaction the startup had promised its investors. These scenarios are playing out in various forms across the AI landscape. Researchers and developers, constrained by the prevailing wisdom that single-layer networks should be sufficient, find themselves hitting walls they can't seem to break through. At a conference in San Francisco, Dr. Lisa Patel, a rising star in the field of speech recognition, presents her team's latest results. Their single-layer network has shown impressive performance on simple speech tasks, but struggles with accents and background noise. While our results are promising, Dr. Patel concludes her presentation, we're finding that certain complex audio patterns seem to be beyond the reach of our current architecture. We're considering ways to increase the network's capacity without adding additional layers. The Q&A session that follows is telling. Several attendees suggest tweaks to the single-layer approach: more neurons, different activation functions, improved training data. But a few voices in the crowd begin to question the underlying assumption. Have we perhaps been too quick to dismiss deeper architectures? Asks one researcher from the back of the room. I know Cybenko's theorem suggests a single layer is sufficient in theory, but are we finding that the computational resources required for complex tasks are simply impractical? The question hangs in the air, met with a mix of thoughtful nods and skeptical frowns. It's a sentiment that's beginning to bubble up in various corners of the AI community, as researchers grapple with the gap between theoretical capabilities and practical limitations. In his office at the University of Toronto, Geoffrey Hinton pores over the latest results from his small team working on multi-layer networks. Despite the prevailing trend, Hinton has remained convinced that deeper architectures hold the key to more powerful AI systems. "Look at this," he says excitedly to his graduate student, pointing to a graph on his computer screen. "Our deep network is outperforming the single-layer models on these complex image recognition tasks, and we're using fewer total neurons." The student leans in, eyes widening as she takes in the implications. "But how is this possible? I thought Cybenko's theorem showed that a single layer could approximate any function." Hinton nods, a wry smile on his face. "In theory, yes. But what the theorem doesn't tell us is how many neurons we'd need in that single layer to achieve the same performance as a deeper network. In practice, we're finding that for many tasks, a deeper architecture can achieve better results with fewer total parameters." As the 1990s progress, more and more researchers begin to echo Hinton's sentiments. The limitations of single-layer networks become increasingly apparent, especially as the complexity of AI tasks grows. Image recognition, natural language processing, speech synthesis, these challenges seem to demand more than what a simple architecture can provide. In labs and startups around the world, developers start to experiment with adding hidden layers, often in secret, wary of going against the prevailing wisdom. They find, to their surprise and excitement, that these deeper networks often perform better on complex tasks and with fewer total neurons than their single-layer counterparts. The tide begins to turn, slowly but surely. At conferences and in journal publications, researchers start to present results comparing single-layer and multi-layer architectures. The data is clear. For many real-world applications, deeper networks are not just viable, but often superior. As this realization spreads, the AI community finds itself at another crossroads. The promise of deep learning, temporarily overshadowed by the misinterpretation of Cybenko's theorem, begins to re-emerge. Researchers who had been working in relative obscurity on multi-layer networks suddenly find their work in high demand. The stage is set for a renaissance in deep learning research, but the journey is far from over. As the community begins to embrace deeper architectures, new challenges emerge. How to effectively train these complex networks, how to avoid overfitting, and perhaps most intriguingly, why do these deep networks seem to perform so well, often defying traditional understanding of statistical learning theory? In a small lab at New York University, Jan LeCun and his team are grappling with these questions. They've been experimenting with convolutional neural networks, a specialized architecture inspired by the human visual system. "Look at this," LeCun says, pointing to a monitor displaying the results of their latest image recognition test. "Our network is picking up on features we never explicitly programmed it to recognize. It's learning hierarchies of representations, from simple edges to complex shapes." His graduate student leans in, eyes wide. "But how is it doing this with so few training examples? I thought deeper networks were more prone to overfitting." LeCun nods, a thoughtful expression on his face. "That's what conventional wisdom would suggest, but we're finding that these deeper architectures seem to have an inherent bias towards good generalization. It's as if the structure itself is acting as a form of regularization." Across the Atlantic in the UK, a young researcher named Andrew Ng is exploring similar territory. He's been experimenting with unsupervised pre-training techniques, using large amounts of unlabeled data to initialize the weights of deep networks before fine-tuning them on smaller labeled datasets. "It's like we're teaching the network to understand the structure of the data before we ask it to perform a specific task," Ng explains to his colleagues. "We're seeing significant improvements in performance, especially when labeled data is scarce." As these researchers push the boundaries of what's possible with deep networks, they're also bumping up against the limitations of available computing power. Training these complex models requires massive amounts of data and computational resources, often pushing the hardware of the time to its limits. In his lab at the University of Montreal, Yoshua Bengio and his team are working on ways to make training deep networks more efficient. They're exploring techniques like layer-wise pre-training and developing new optimization algorithms. The potential of these deep architectures is enormous, Bengio says during a team meeting, but we need to find ways to train them effectively. It's not just about adding more layers or more neurons. We need to fundamentally rethink how we approach the learning process. As the calendar turns to the new millennium, the AI community finds itself on the cusp of a revolution. The groundwork laid by researchers like Hinton, LeCun, Ng, and Bengio is about to bear fruit in ways that will transform not just the field of AI, but the entire technological landscape. But even as excitement builds around the potential of deep learning, questions linger. How will these complex models be interpreted and explained? What are the ethical implications of deploying such powerful AI systems? And perhaps most fundamentally, what does the success of deep learning tell us about the nature of intelligence itself? In a small cafe in Paris, two AI researchers are engaged in a heated debate over coffee. But don't you see, one argues, gesturing emphatically, the success of these deep networks suggests that intelligence might emerge from relatively simple principles, given sufficient scale and structure. Her colleague shakes his head, unconvinced. Or it could mean we're still missing something fundamental. These networks are powerful, yes, but they're also opaque. We can't always explain why they make the decisions they do. This debate, playing out in cafes and conference halls around the world, reflects the complex legacy of Cybenko's universal approximation theorem. What began as a mathematical proof has become a touchstone for discussions about the nature of artificial intelligence itself. Back in his office at Dartmouth, George Cybenko reflects on the unexpected journey his theorem has taken. When I first proved it, he muses, I never imagined the impact it would have. It was meant to be a theoretical foundation, not a practical guideline. Indeed, the theorem's role in AI research has been far from straightforward. In the years following its publication, it served as a crucial legitimizing force for neural network research. At a time when many in the field were skeptical of connectionist approaches, Cybenko's work provided a solid mathematical grounding. It gave us a foothold, recalls a veteran AI researcher who lived through the so-called AI winter of the 1990s. When funding was scarce and interest was waning, we could point to the theorem and say, look, there's real potential here. We just need to figure out how to harness it. But as the years passed, the theorem's implications were gradually re-evaluated. Researchers began to realize that while a single-layer network could theoretically approximate any function, the resources required to do so might be impractical for many real-world tasks. It's like saying you can build any structure with enough Lego bricks, explains a computer science professor at Stanford. Technically true, but try building a skyscraper that way. At some point, you need to think about more efficient architectures. This realization led to a renewed interest in deeper network structures, sparking the deep learning revolution that would transform AI in the 21st century. Ironically, the very theorem that had once been used to justify simpler architectures now became a springboard for exploring more complex ones. We started asking ourselves, if a single layer can do so much, what could multiple layers achieve? Says a researcher at Google Brain. It was like we'd been given permission to dream bigger. As deep learning began to achieve unprecedented results in tasks ranging from image recognition to natural language processing, the AI community found itself grappling with new questions. How do these complex networks actually work? What are they learning? And perhaps most intriguingly, what do their successes and failures tell us about the nature of intelligence itself? In a way, Cybenko's theorem opened up a whole new set of philosophical questions, notes a cognitive scientist at MIT. If a relatively simple mathematical structure can approximate any function, what does that say about the fundamental nature of cognition? These questions have led to a rich interdisciplinary dialogue, bringing together computer scientists, neuroscientists, philosophers, and cognitive psychologists. Some see the success of deep learning as evidence that intelligence emerges from the complex interplay of simple components. Others argue that it reveals the limitations of our current approaches, highlighting the need for new paradigms that can capture the nuances of human-like reasoning. For Cybenko himself, watching this debate unfold has been a humbling experience. When you prove a theorem, you're focused on the math, he says. You don't always see the broader implications. It's been fascinating to see how this idea has taken on a life of its own. Indeed, the theorem's journey from a mathematical proof to a cornerstone of AI research illustrates the often unpredictable nature of scientific progress. What began as an exploration of the theoretical capabilities of neural networks has become a launching pad for some of the most transformative technologies of our time. As AI continues to evolve, with new architectures and approaches constantly emerging, Cybenko's theorem remains a touchstone. It serves as a reminder of the power of mathematical foundations, the importance of questioning assumptions, and the endless potential for innovation in the field of artificial intelligence. In research labs and tech companies around the world, the legacy of the universal approximation theorem continues to inspire new directions in AI research. From exploring more efficient training methods for deep networks to developing novel architectures that can handle increasingly complex tasks, researchers are constantly pushing the boundaries of what's possible. At a bustling AI conference in Tokyo, a young researcher takes the stage to present her latest work. Inspired by Cybenko's theorem, she begins, we've developed a new approach to neural network architecture that combines the theoretical power of universal approximation with the practical efficiency of deep learning. The audience leans forward, intrigued. As she delves into the technical details, it's clear that the spirit of Cybenko's work continues to drive innovation in the field. In Silicon Valley, tech giants are leveraging these advances to push the boundaries of what's possible with AI. At Google's DeepMind, researchers are applying deep learning techniques to tackle complex problems in protein folding, potentially revolutionizing drug discovery and medical research. What's fascinating, explains a lead researcher, is how these networks are able to capture intricate patterns in the data that we humans struggle to perceive. It's as if they're tapping into some fundamental structure of the problem space, much like Cybenko's theorem suggested was possible. Meanwhile, at OpenAI, a team is working on language models that can generate human-like text, translate between languages, and even write code. The scale of these models is staggering, with some containing hundreds of billions of parameters. We're seeing capabilities emerge that we never explicitly programmed for, says a senior AI engineer. It's both exciting and a bit unsettling. We're constantly asking ourselves, what are these models really learning? How can we ensure they're safe and beneficial? These questions echo through the AI community, sparking debates about ethics, transparency, and the nature of machine intelligence. At a roundtable discussion at MIT, researchers from various disciplines grapple with the implications. The success of deep learning has been remarkable, notes a cognitive scientist, but it's also revealed how much we still don't understand about intelligence, both artificial and human. Cybenko's theorem gave us a mathematical foundation, but the practical implementations have opened up a whole new set of questions. Indeed, as AI systems become more powerful and ubiquitous, the need for interpretability and explainability has become increasingly urgent. Researchers are developing new techniques to peer into the black box of deep neural networks, trying to understand how they arrive at their decisions. It's like we've built this incredibly powerful tool, says a computer vision expert, but we're still learning how to use it responsibly. The challenge now is to bridge the gap between theoretical understanding and practical application. This tension between theory and practice, between the elegant simplicity of Cybenko's theorem and the complex reality of modern AI systems, continues to drive the field forward. As researchers push the boundaries of what's possible, they're also circling back to fundamental questions about the nature of intelligence and computation. At a bustling hackathon in San Francisco, teams of developers are putting these cutting-edge AI tools to the test, building applications that range from the practical to the whimsical. One team is working on an AI-powered personal assistant that can understand and respond to natural language queries with uncanny accuracy. It's amazing how far we've come, says a young programmer, her eyes glued to the screen as she fine-tunes the model. A few years ago, this kind of natural language understanding seemed like science fiction. Now, we're implementing it in a weekend hackathon. Across the room, another team is experimenting with generative AI, creating a system that can produce original music in the style of any composer. As the AI-generated melodies fill the air, blending seamlessly with the clatter of keyboards and excited chatter, it's hard not to feel a sense of wonder at the possibilities. Yet even as these breakthroughs captivate the imagination, challenges remain. Issues of bias in AI systems, concerns about privacy and data usage, and the potential for misuse of powerful AI technologies are at the forefront of many researchers' minds. At a panel discussion on AI ethics, a diverse group of experts debates these thorny issues. We need to ensure that as we push the boundaries of what's possible with AI, we're also considering the societal implications, argues a policy expert. Cybenko's theorem showed us the potential of neural networks, but it's up to us to ensure that potential is realized ethically and responsibly, adds a computer scientist. As the discussion unfolds, it becomes clear that the journey from Cybenko's theorem to today's AI landscape has been one of constant evolution and reevaluation. The theorem, once seen as a definitive statement on the capabilities of neural networks, is now understood as just one piece of a much larger puzzle. In a way, Cybenko's work was like a seed, reflects a veteran AI researcher. It gave us a starting point, a foundation to build upon. But what's grown from that seed has surpassed anything we could have imagined back then. Indeed, as neural networks have grown deeper and more complex, researchers have had to develop new theoretical frameworks to understand their behavior. Yet even as these new theories emerge, the universal approximation theorem remains a touchstone, a reminder of the fundamental power of neural computation. It's like we've been climbing a mountain, muses a young PhD student. Cybenko's theorem gave us a view of the peak, but as we've climbed higher, we've discovered that the landscape is far more complex and beautiful than we initially realized. This metaphor resonates with many in the field. The journey from theory to practice, from simple single-layer networks to today's deep learning behemoths, has been one of constant discovery and surprise. Each breakthrough has opened up new questions, new avenues of exploration. At a cutting-edge research lab, scientists are pushing the boundaries of what's possible with neural networks. They're exploring architectures that go beyond the traditional feed-forward model, incorporating concepts from neuroscience and cognitive psychology. We're starting to see networks that can adapt their structure on the fly, that can reason about their own knowledge and limitations, explains a lead researcher. It's as if we're moving from universal approximation to universal cognition. These developments are both exciting and daunting. As AI systems become more powerful and autonomous, the need for robust theoretical understanding becomes ever more critical. Researchers are grappling with questions of stability, generalization, and interpretability, seeking to build a new theoretical foundation for the age of deep learning. Cybenko showed us what was possible, says a prominent AI theorist. Now we need to understand why it works and how we can push it even further. As the sun sets on another day of frenetic research and development, the AI community finds itself at a familiar crossroads. The practical successes of deep learning have outpaced theoretical understanding, creating a tension that drives innovation. Yet amidst this rapid progress, Cybenko's theorem remains a beacon, a reminder of the power of foundational insights. It stands as a testament to the enduring value of theoretical work, even in a field driven by empirical success. Who knows, says a young researcher, her eyes bright with excitement. Maybe the next Cybenko is out there right now, working on a theorem that will revolutionize our understanding once again. As night falls and the labs quiet down, the spirit of curiosity and exploration that drove Cybenko's work continues to burn bright. The journey from universal approximation to artificial general intelligence is far from over, but with each step, the AI community moves closer to unraveling the mysteries of intelligence itself.